Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Zanu PF is pushing ED 2030 agenda with renewed vigor and determination. Here is the business tycoon Kulakwashe Takwirei promoting ED 2030.
Issue my foreign currency receipts. Now 2017, gathering 2.7, 2.8 billion. Kubaza vakatanga vakagadzira marozi ekumamisha netown. Marozi ese anodarikidza 70,000 kilometers. Kuzoona Harare Bay semamarodi akadaro. Tikumaona hapana marozi akatogadzirwa musecond dispensation. Tikuona zvakare madhamu ari kuvakwa. Saka isu seZanu PF tatumwa nemi takazoona kuti mabasa aya anofanira kupedziswa. Anofanira kupedziswa nemunhu akamatanga. Saka ndaita resolution number 1 inoti 2030 nokuti tinoda kuti vapedzise basa ravakatanga. Isu vandoita bhizinisi kana tichitsvaga vanhu vanoshanda pamabasa, hatitangi tatsvaga munhu kuti anoshanda basa. Tinofanira tatsvaga basa rake kufanira kushanda.
Ben, welcome to the program.
Good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. You know, it is today where I read one article where the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli, stood up and said, you know, Zimbabwe is already an upper middle income economy. They've already achieved that. It says the people of Zimbabwe are already living on $9 a day. And that's about it. So when I hear Takwirei stand up and talk all this nonsense, say because we have built a Trababulas and a few roads, this is the best job that we can, you know, they benchmark from the very, very lowest point. They don't want to benchmark from where Zimbabwe was when they got it at independence. They want to benchmark how they destroyed it themselves. Zimbabwe at independence was likened, you know, to be the next Singapore or the next South Korea. We had money, you know, that was equivalent or more than the US dollar. Now that's where the benchmark should be starting from. Not to say let's start benchmarking from, you know, the bearer check, you know, from from the disaster they created. It's pathetic at the end of the day. Very, very pathetic, delusional, if I may say.
Well, for the record, as much as the IMF has said Zimbabwe has achieved a 6% growth rate, this is not a great achievement, given that when Zimbabwe had the GNU in 2009, the economy registered a 12% growth rate, up from minus 6% the previous year. So in total, we had 18% growth rate. Growth rate depends where you're starting from. That is the most important message to be sent out there. So to say Mnangagwa has achieved a lot because he has managed to get 6% growth rate is meaningless. Where did we start from? And more significantly, who says that 6% is the best we can do? And in this particular instance, with this ED 2030, it should be, people should understand what the regime is saying is Mnangagwa should be allowed to serve beyond what the Constitution allows him to, 2028, on the grounds that he's achieving a lot. That is an idiotic lie. The Constitution, the term limits, were never written with a condition that said, well, the incumbent will be allowed to stay on an additional few years if they're achieving well. It was never written with that in mind. The main reason why the people of Zimbabwe wanted that constitutional clause put in desperately is because they, in 2013, when that constitution was written, they'd been stuck with the same corrupt, incompetent regime since the country's independence. That's from 1980 to 2013. That's 33 years. They could not get Mugabe out of office because Zanu PF rigged the elections. So putting that clause in was an extra to try to at least achieve that, be able to remove Mugabe or whoever is in the presidency. So this whole idea of Mnangagwa should be allowed to stay is exactly what the people were trying to avoid. That should be understood.
We should not forget the fact that Zanu PF has never had a succession plan from the very beginning. Whoever is in the top position seems to control even them themselves. So nobody dares speak up. We know what happened with, events like Cholosho Declaration, and anybody who seemed to want to be aspiring or becoming popular. They have been cut down. So this is yet another excuse of how ZANU operates. But I would want to emphasize to say, this really doesn't matter. It's a Zanu PF thing. It's not going to change anything. The real agenda here is that we have elections that are not free, fair, and credible, and we have been told to fix that. And that should be our concentration. You know, leave all these side shows aside because that's what they are, side shows. So even if you stop ED 2030, you still have 2028 rigged elections to deal with. And ZANU PF will welcome those 2028 elections because they're just going to rig them. So, whichever way, 2030 is really not important.
What I think is worth explaining here too is the fact that what has been happening in countries like Tanzania these last few weeks has brought home to ZANU PF that rigging elections is going to be tough. It's even tougher now. But getting away with it is going to be even tougher, particularly for a country like Zimbabwe. Because we should not forget that both SADC and the AU condemned Zimbabwe's 2023 elections. They condemned the process as flawed and illegal. So the regime is illegitimate. Mnangagwa knows that he is illegitimate. The pressure has been on him to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that elections in future are free, fair, and credible. Now that SADC and the AU have put their markers that Zimbabwe's last elections were not free, fair, and credible, 2028 is going to be even tougher for Mnangagwa and ZANU PF. They've so far not implemented even one token reform. So for them to go into 2028, not even a token reform implemented, the chances are SADC will say those elections were not free, fair, and credible. That possibility is now even more staring them straight in the face, particularly in the context of the problems that Tanzania is having. The pressure on SADC and the AU to really stand and put their foot down in such situations is increasing now more than ever before. So ZANU PF is under pressure. There's no denying that. In their case, they got away with it in 2023 because the opposition participated in those flawed elections, although they knew the elections were being rigged, and they also knew that by participating, they are giving ZANU PF legitimacy. But now that Chamisa has been discredited completely, he is now being openly called a liar and a conman. Chamisa's political credibility is at an all-time low. ZANU PF and Chamisa himself must know that conning Even his Shamisa Chete Chete brigade to participate in 2028 and expect them to do so in their millions, there is a big question mark. Hence the reason why Zanu PF is pushing this agenda 2030 in the hope that by pushing it as hard as they can, they will be able to galvanize more and more Zimbabweans to participate. Because a lot of people there are being conned to believe that if you participate, you are protecting the constitution, you are stopping Mnangagwa getting into the presidency. Whereas in reality, participating will only guarantee Zanu PF legitimacy. Stop participating, you deny the regime legitimacy. And then it's irrelevant whether Mnangagwa had actually succeeded in pushing the constitution to be changed. Because if Zanu PF does not get political legitimacy, it will be forced into a new GNU. And the new GNU is not going to accept a dictator like Mnangagwa to preside over it. Even if they did, he will not have the dictatorial powers that he has now. That is why Zanu PF is going to push ED 2030. It's a do or die situation for them. They would want to push it so that as long as ED 2030 is on the national agenda, the issue of free, fair, and credible elections is pushed off. And if we go into 2028 elections with ED 2030 on the national agenda, Zanu PF is hoping it can rig the elections and get away with it. That is the scenario that people must understand. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
In closing, I would want to say, we are kind of between a rock and a hard place. Because when you look at the events, and you look at our so-called opposition or opposition sympathizers, everybody is is playing this whole 2030, you know, agenda. We have now even gotten to an extent where we have the likes of Gambakwe already at the constitutional courts, and we have you know different political players now having debates, discussions, and broadcasts about the whole 2030 movement. My question now is, do they not see what this whole thing is all about? That even if you win the 2030 you know saga, it's it's a false win. It was a false start. you know you you're giving yourself to say we have defeated the Zanu PF. Now let us go and defeat them again in 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 the 2028 elections. Exactly playing what Zanu PF wants. The real thing here is, like you said, Zanu PF really wants us to participate, to stop, events like what happened in Tanzania happening in Zimbabwe, where you find the Tanzanian, citizens refuse to participate in a sham of an election. And right now, the whole world is watching, and the whole world is making comments, and the world is making a move. They don't want that. So they'd rather have you feel as if you have triumphed over them, only for them to put you right in the teeth. It's worrying that, with all the learned people that are in the so-called opposition, none of them seem to be getting it. You know, is it deliberate, or it is just sheer naivety? You know, it's baffling. It's really baffling now. We are really in a tight spot, and it seems as if we are fighting a losing battle anyway.
Well, my last remark on this issue would be ED 2030 is a decoy. Zanu PF does not want the nation to finally address in a meaningful way the case of rigged elections. The regime has denied the ordinary people of Zimbabwe a meaningful vote for 45 years and counting. We need to focus on that problem because that is at the heart of our problem. If we had stuck to the issue of demanding reforms, and indeed, if MDC had implemented those democratic reforms when they had the best opportunity during the GNU, Zimbabwe will be in a different place. Zimbabwe will not be talking of rigged elections anymore. We are still talking about it because none of those reforms were implemented. We should not allow ourselves to be distracted by the ED 2030 agenda. We should remain focused on demanding democratic reforms and free and fair elections. Failure to do so, do not participate in a flawed election to give Zanu PF legitimacy. The message has got to be hammered in, and we must keep on hammering it in. Think about it. Thank you very much, those who were able to join us. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 6 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. Zimbabwean time. Thank you and good night.